Hey everyone, welcome to the Oakler's YouTube channel. Today we're going to make a more traditional quilt block, but we're going to be using it in a pattern for a bag. Now, this is really exciting for me. I am actually doing my first collaborative YouTube tutorial. I didn't even know you could do a collaborative tutorial without physically being in the same room. So when Lorrie Nunemaker and I started talking, I was kind of like, are we flying out somewhere? Are we going to hang out? Is she going to come hang out in my dining room? Because that would be amazing. But no, we're doing a collaborative event where I'm going to show you how to make part of the bag, which is the quilt block accent that's going to go on the bag. And I'll show you that in just a minute. And she's going to show you how to actually construct the entire bag using this design or any design you want. It doesn't have to be with the quilt block. But if you're not following Lorrie Nunemaker on all of the social platforms, you need to do that. She is amazing. She's got a million Cricut tutorials out there. I don't own a Cricut, but I'm a paycheck away from buying one from just watching her tutorials. But she's also got a lot of sewing patterns, and she's so good at explaining them because she's a newer sewer, like many of us are. So she explains it in terms of a newer sewer, which is fantastic when you're learning. So it's been so fun to be able to work with her on this, and I'm kind of sad to see it come to an end because I've really enjoyed messaging with her every day and brainstorming ideas with her every day. It's been just such a treat to be able to do this. So Lorrie, thank you so much for allowing me to collab with you. This was huge for me. I hope we can do more of these in the future. So let's talk about the bag. This is the bag pattern we're going to be working on. So I'm going to show you how to make this quilt block right here so that you can make the middle accent of your bag. And then once you're done with that, you're going to hop on over to Lorrie's channel where she's going to show you how to make the actual bag. And I'm going to have links everywhere for her YouTube video and her channel. You can check the description. You'll see them popping up in one of the corners. There's going to be a link on the end screen. Don't even worry about it. You will be able to find this video. So obviously, I made the Christmas version of this bag. This is a very traditional quilt block. I think it's actually called Puzzle Star Quilt Block or Star Puzzle Quilt Block. It's a very, very traditional design. What you do is you change it up based on how you lay out the coloring. So I'm going to show you my take, which is this right here. We use the traditional star quilt block. We used 4 of them, 2 on each side, to create the middle strip of this bag. And then you can see you've got the tones and the inside. It's a cute bag. That's a really cute bag, right? That's what we're working on today. So before we dive in, if you haven't already, please consider clicking the subscribe button down below. If you like this video at any point, give it a like. If you have any questions or comments or you just want to say hey, just write them in the comments down below. I'm checking them all the time. Since this is a more traditional quilt block, I'm sure a lot of you guys have some great tips to make maybe the seams a little bit easier, maybe the whole block a little bit flatter. So make sure you leave any of your tips down in the description below. So this is the quilt block we're going to be designing today. All right, we're going to be making this exact same one. So this is one of the quilt blocks. I actually already made 2, and I attached the side panels onto it. So this is going to be the middle part of one side of your tote bag. So you can see it doesn't have to be a Christmassy type design. This is a more modern design. You could go totally solid. It would be cute. So I'm giving you 3 different ways to make this quilt block. One is using traditional rectangles and half square triangles in order to make all of our angles. Another option, if you have a Cricut, is to download the .svg files that I have on my website. If you go to oakleroots.com, pattern vault, enter your email address, click through, and you're gonna see all of the SVG files right there for this quilt block. All you have to do is download those, put them on your Cricut Design Studio, and use those to cut your fabric. Also, for my friends out there who don't have Cricuts, who are quilters, did you know that you can cut fabric on a Cricut machine? What? Again, I think an investment in a Cricut machine is very near in my future. A third option is to use templates, and I'm going to show you how to make the templates for this. So this pretty much allows you to use the pieces as if you cut them on a Cricut machine, but you didn't use a Cricut machine. Instead, you used, some scissors. So if you go to the pattern vault on my website, you'll be able to download this pattern right here, and this is the layout for the design. this is going to be your template page. And you can see there's just two shapes in this pattern. There's this parallelogram and a triangle. If you choose to use these templates or the SVG files, the cutting instructions is right here telling you exactly how many of each type you need. If you choose to use the rectangles and squares, the cutting instructions will be right here. When you print this, make sure you print this in Adobe Acrobat Reader and you print it at 100%. I'll have a little walkthrough right here where you can see exactly how you do that. And on the bottom is a 1-inch square. You can use a ruler to check that and make sure it printed at the right scale. And the last page is a very brief overview with piecing instructions, but really if you want to see exactly the tips and techniques to making this block, you're going to have to watch this YouTube video. All right, so we're going to be walking through 2 blocks today. The first block, we're going to be using the templates. The second block, we're going to be using traditional rectangles to make half square triangles. All the timestamps will be in the first comment down below. And so that way, if you're not interested in templates, you just want to go look at the rectangles, just click there and it's going to take you straight to that part of the video. All right, let's get started. So my take on this traditional block pattern uses 4 different colors. If you're going to be using these quilt blocks to make the bag pattern that you can find on Lorrie Nunemaker's channel, you're going to need a fat quarter of each one of your colors. Now, this can be scrappy as well. You can see the color in the middle right here. This is color 3. You don't need that much of this. So you can get very scrappy with this pattern. But for my take on the pattern, it's going to be a fat quarter for each color. So let's first discuss how to piece this block together using templates. If you don't have a Cricut machine that's going to cut your fabric out for you, but you still want to use the template version, you're going to print out page 2 of the PDF file. This is going to have these templates right here. Now, when I am using templates, I like to create my own templates instead of using paper. So to do that, I get these very inexpensive chopping mats. I believe this is from Dollar General, and it's $1 for 2 of these large cutting mats, and they're very flexible. So they are perfect for this. I also use a Sharpie to trace the templates. This is just easier because it takes a lot of effort to rub it off. So you can see here I have some scrap plastic from an old cutting mat that I used previously for templates. So I'm just going to show you how I do this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my clear mat over the template, and then I just hold it in place. If you feel more comfortable taping this down, go ahead and do that, but I'm okay holding it in place. And then I just trace the outer edge as best I can. Now, if you were interested in fussy cutting your blocks, you could also trace the inside shape so that you know this is exactly what the finished block is going to look like. I'm not fussy cutting today, so I'm going to leave that. So then I'm just going to trace the other one as well. So I like to mark them, so this was B, and now I'm going to trace A. And I write A on it. So now I have my 2 templates traced, not very neatly. Now I just take some regular scissors and we'll just cut them out. Here are our templates all cut out, ready to go. So like I said, this pattern requires 4 different fabrics. I like to make sure I write down on a piece of paper which color is going to be used with which fabric. So this sheet is a great place to do that. So I'm just going to make a note of which fabrics I'm using for which color. This way, as I'm cutting things, I don't get confused about which color goes where. So first I need to cut out 4 B templates from color 1, which is going to be my monkey fabric. So when we're cutting out B, we need to make sure we cut it out the right way. If you have right side up, meaning the parallelogram is going up into your right, if you leave it up like that, you need to trace it on the right side of the fabric. If you'd like to trace out the design on the wrong side of the fabric, flip your fabric over, obviously to the wrong side, but then make sure you flip your template over as well. The thing with this parallelogram is that it is not interchangeable. If you don't cut this out the correct way, the block won't come together correctly. So make sure if you're cutting on the wrong side, you flip your template and you trace on the wrong side of your template. Once you have all 4 of them traced, I like to just kind of cut out a rectangle around all 4 of the units to make it easier to cut it. But if you're trying to save on fabric, you can cut them out one by one in place. And then I'll just cut them out. And there you have your piece B's. So from color 2, you're going to need to have 8 A templates. So once again, I'm just going to trace these and cut these out with scissors. And then just cut out these 8 triangles. Here are our 8 color 2s. Now we need to cut out 4 color 3s using the A template. So there are our 4 color 3s, and then let's do the last color. So color 4 is the one that's going to be used the most, and you're going to need 12 A template cuts. Make it easier to cut these out. So now that we have all of our template pieces cut out, I like to arrange the block so I can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like. Now this block is made up of 4 quadrants. Every quadrant is exactly alike. So once you understand how to build one quadrant, you just have to do that 3 more times and your block is complete. So for the quadrant, we take color 1, which is template B, and then we take color 3, and that's going to go on the left of it just like so. Then we take a color 4, and that's going to go on the opposite side of the parallelogram. This is one rectangle in our quadrant. Our quadrant is made up of 2 rectangles. So this is the bottom rectangle. Now for the top rectangle, we just take color 2, and that's going to go on the corner, and that's also going to go catty corner to it, just like that. And then the other 2 triangles are our color 4. That just line up with color 2. And that is one quadrant. What we do is we sew these 2 triangles together and these 2 triangles together, sew these triangles onto our parallelogram, and then we sew both of these rectangles together, which I'll show you on the sewing machine how we do that. And we'll do that for all 4 of our quadrants. So before we head to the machine, I'm going to pin these together to make it a little bit easier to manage while at the sewing machine. So take your 2 template A's, put them right side together. And since you're using templates or you're using the pre-cut pieces with your Cricut, these notches on the sides will line up really nicely so you know exactly how it all goes together. Just pin in place. Do the same for the other side. And then the same for the parallelogram. You just take your triangle, flip it right sides together. Again, you can see there's a rounded type corner. You just line those up and line up the straight edge, and it should go together nice and easy. Now you could pin this other triangle piece onto the other side, but to keep it looking nice and clean, I'm going to wait until I sew on this triangle and press it open before I add the opposite triangle to the parallelogram. Now let's go to the sewing machine and see how we sew this together. So let's talk about 1/4 inch seam allowances. You can see on my faceplate right here, I have a 1/4 inch line. Now that technically is where you should be able to line up your fabric and you'll get a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Since my needle does not move back and forth, this is pretty accurate for me. If you have a needle that can move to the left or move to the right, you're going to need to make sure it's in the middle when you're using these faceplates. So in quilting, we oftentimes discuss a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. That means that we're using about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but not quite, but also not 1/8 of an inch less. So for this, you really have to get the feel of it. It is important to not do a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance, especially on a block like we're working with today, because as you can see in this finished quilt block, the seams get very, very bulky. If you use a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance, your lines are not going to line up correctly and your block is going to end up smaller than it needs to be. So everybody has their own strategy. What you can do is take a ruler and a piece of washi tape and mark where just inside a 1/4 inch seam allowance is. You can eyeball it. For me, my presser foot is just a bit in from the 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I just use the side of my presser foot as my scant 1/4 inch seam allowance designator. So I'm using a 2.5 millimeter stitch length and a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm just going to sew along my pinned edges. So what we want is to press our seams open, but since these things get so hot so quickly, I like to just press it on one side first, let it cool, and then I'll come back and press the seam open. So give all of your blocks a nice press. I like to press them when they're closed. Lift it up, open up the seam, give it a finger press, and then press it again with the iron on the front side, and then put it to the side. And I will press them on the back whenever I'm opening up the seam. So now we're going to go back and we're going to open up the seams. I like to just open it up with my fingers first, and this is why I let them cool, because these can get very hot if you try to open them right after you press it. So I open them up with my fingers first, and then I just press the iron on top of that open seam and then lift. Another option is to use a very lightweight starch, so like flatter. You can see I like this one because it's empty, and just super fine mist. Press it open, press it down. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to press all of the seams open. Also press open the seams on the parallelogram piece. So now we have all of our half square triangle pieces pressed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my sewing machine and I am going to stitch on the other side of the parallelogram with color number 4. Again, right sides together. And I'm just going to add these on just like I did the other side. And then I'll stitch them on and I will press them open and we'll come back here. So now you have 4 rectangles ready for each quadrant. We have to finish constructing the other rectangles for each quadrant. Before we move on, it's always good to square up your blocks. At this point, these blocks should be measuring 2.5 by 2.5 inches. Just take a regular ruler, find the 45-degree mark, and line the 45-degree angle along the center seam. If your piece is a little bit big, just trim it down. Just like so. And I like to just give all of them a once-over. Usually you only have to trim down one side if you line up the bottom and the side. So I line up the 45-degree mark, the left side and the bottom with the edge of the block. So that way all I have to do is trim the right side and the top. And if you did a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, your block should be the right size or just a little bit big. If your block right now is less than 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches, your seam allowance was too big. All right, to construct the top part of our quadrant, this is the pattern. Your color 2 triangle is going to be pointing to the top right. The other color 2 triangle is going to be pointing down to the bottom right. So they go together just like this. Every single rectangle we do is going to be put together just like this. So I like to just grab a couple pins, make them right sides together, line them up. Since we squared off our blocks, they should be good in size. And then just pin together. Just like so. And do this for all 4 rectangles. And now you're going to take this to the sewing machine and stitch these down again at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, so now we have both of our rectangular units. Once again, it's good to just go and square them up. Both of these should measure 4.5 by 2.5 inches. So I like to, again, just line it up. And what squaring it up does is it keeps the pieces obviously the size that you want them, but it also makes it easier when you're putting the whole thing together. If you have all these wonky edges and you're trying to align them up, you're going to end up with these wavy kind of crooked seams. So it's good to just take the extra step and square up your blocks, especially when you're using these templates. By using the templates and a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, they do tend to be a little bit bigger. So we like to just clean them up before we put the whole thing together. And you can see this time I'm doing all 4 edges because since there are 3 pieces of fabric here, they did tend to warp a little bit. So I just want it to be as clean as possible. All right, now let's check our half square triangles. So your half square, triangular, rectangular units should be pretty squared up since we squared up the 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch half square triangles already. So I'm just giving them a double check, but these all look pretty perfect. So that's awesome. Now all we have to do is put together the 4 quadrants. So each quadrant is going to look like this. Your parallelogram pointing up to the top right, your half square triangle rectangle with color 2 pointing to the top right, just like this. This is how every quadrant needs to line up, just like this. So we just flip it down, right sides together, line them up, and then pin them. And I'm going to do this with all 4 units. Alright, let's go to the sewing machine and let's sew along these pinned edges at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now you have all 4 quadrants sewn together, and the last step is just sewing them together like this. See, and now you have your traditional, yet with a modern take star. So what I'm going to do is sew them together just like this. Just line up the edges. And since you previously squared up your rectangles, you should be good right now. So now I'm going to take these to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew along these pinned edges at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to press the seams open as I've been doing this entire time. So now we have our 2 halves. We just have to line them up just like we want them to be finished. Fold them down right sides together, pin in place. When I'm putting these parts together, I do like to line up the middle seams just so my points match as much as possible. I don't have perfectly matching points in this block, and no one can tell. But I do like to make sure the centers match up. And then I just kind of work my way on the edges. All right, for this last seam, we're just going to do a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance and press the seam open. And there is your finished traditional star block. I like to square this up. If you have an 8.5 by 8.5 inch ruler, you can just center it to square up your block. If you don't have one of these, that's fine. Use your standard ruler, find 4 inches and 1/4 and line that up with your center seam. So 4 inches and 1/4, line it up, make sure it's straight. And then if you have any excess, cut off the excess. And then you're just going to go around 4 times doing this. And you'll notice that, your ruler's a little wobbly because these seams are so big. Just be graceful with yourself. It's okay if this isn't a sheet of paper, right? There's a lot of seams here. You did a lot of work. It will still look beautiful in a quilt or in a bag. So there is one block. So if you're planning on using these to make a tote bag that Lorrie Nunemaker is providing a tutorial for, you're going to need to make 3 more of these exact same quilt blocks. Including 4 quilt blocks, you will also need 4 strips of fabric, which are 8.5 inch by 1.5 inches long. We're going to add these on in the end of the video to make a complete panel. So go ahead and follow along the rest of the video or go down to the first comment that's pinned below and click the timestamp for finishing the side panel. So now let's discuss how to make the quilt block using rectangles. You're going to need 4 cuts from color 1, which are 4.5 inches by 2.5 inches. From color 2, you're going to need 2 pieces that are cut at 4.25 inch by 4.25 inch. From color 3, you'll need 4 pieces that are each 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And from color 4, you're going to need 4 pieces that are 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches, and 2 pieces that are 4.25 inch by 4.25 inch. The first things I like to do is get all of my 2.5 inch by 2.5 inches. So these are colors 3 and 4. And I'm going to flip them to the back side. And I'm going to use a small ruler to trace a diagonal from one end to the other. So just pick 2 corners and create a diagonal. This will be our stitch line later. So do these to all 8 pieces of fabric. So now that these are prepped, just put them to the side. Grab color 4 and color 2. These are your 4 1/4 inch by 4 1/4 inch blocks. You're going to grab one color 2 and one color 4 and lay them right sides together, just like this. Now, I like to use a couple pins just in the middle. Do the same with the other color 4 and color 2 pairing. All right, so these are prepped. When we go to the sewing machine, we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance along all 4 edges, and I'll show you once we get there. Now, take your color 1 rectangles, take a color 3 square, and right side down. Now, whichever side is pointing towards the center is the side you're going to see. So you can see on mine, I have these dots, and then I have a little bug over here. If I want to include this bug in the final block, I need to make sure that this part, that this triangle is pointing towards the center. So I'm just going to align it up with the left side. Color 3 lines up with color 1 on the left side with the diagonal line that you drew touching the bottom left corner. Pin this in place and do the same step for the other 3 color 1 rectangles. Always making sure that the diagonal line is stopping on the bottom left corner. All right, so now that we have these pieces prepped, let's go to the sewing machine. So first, let's work with our color 2 and color 4 rectangles. Remember, we put these right sides together. And now we're going to take it to the machine, and we're going to do a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. What this means is that we're not going to go straight against the 1/4 inch line, but just inside. My presser foot is just inside the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I use this edge of my presser foot to line up my fabric to do a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's important for you to know where your scant line is going to be. If you need to take a piece of washi tape and a ruler to mark on your machine where that's going to be, this is a good time to do that. So I just start with one side and go along all the way from the top to the bottom. I then lift it up and I go on the other side. I don't go in an interior box on the inside of the fabric. I go every time from end to end, a straight line. Now let's sew our color 1 rectangles. Remember, we have the color 4 pinned to it. I like to start on the long edge when I sew instead of on the point. We're going to be sewing along that pencil line that we drew, that diagonal line. And it's just easier if I start on the long edge versus the corner, because the corner can sometimes get eaten into the machine. You won't have that problem if you start on the other side. So do all 4 pieces this way. All right, so if you chain pieced all these, just go ahead and cut them apart. Take out all your pins if you haven't already. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut off these extra triangles on our color 1 piece. We want the triangle that's inside. We don't need this. So what you do is you take a ruler, line up the 1/4 inch mark along with your stitch line, and then just trim off that edge. This way, when we press it open, you can see we have a nice corner on our rectangle. Do this for the other pieces. Now, for our little square sandwiches, why we did that was to create 4 half square triangles in one go. So take your ruler. I like a little bit bigger of a ruler so I have more control. You're going to line it up with the point on the top and the point on the bottom, just like this, and then just slice down the middle. Okay, and now you'll take one of your triangles that you just made, line up one of your grid marks with the bottom edge here, and then the side of your ruler with the top point. So you can see we're making a right angle here. So I have a 1/2 inch mark here lined up with the bottom. I have my side of my ruler going straight from the top to the bottom, ending at the point of the triangle. And then I will slice it. And now we have 2 half square triangles. And once we do the same with the other one, we'll have 4. This is a quicker way to make 4 half square triangles in one go. Do the same with your other square sandwich. Now take all of this to the iron and press all of the seams open. So here are my rectangular pieces ready for their next step. As you can see, I pressed the seams open on the back. If you used the 4 at a time half square triangle method, you might see that in order to open these seams on the back, you're first going to have to cut off these dog ears. So I press them open on one side and then give them a little dog ear snip. And then I go back to the iron and I press the seams completely open. So you can see that I pressed all the seams open on the back of the half square triangles. So I'm going to put those to the side for now while I finish up my rectangles. Take your other 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch color 4 blocks and line those up with the bottom right of your triangle, making sure that the diagonal line meets the top right corner. And do this for all 4 pieces. And just like you did previously, take this to the sewing machine and stitch along this diagonal line. And once again, we're going to trim off this outer triangle using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just line up your 1/4 inch on your ruler with that seam and slice off the triangle. Now take these blocks to your iron and press them open, making sure you also press the seam on the back open. So here are our parallelogram rectangles ready to go. To get the other rectangle ready for the quadrant, we need to trim these down to 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. So lay it out, line up your 45-degree mark along that middle seam. And I like to line up the left side and the bottom side with the 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch lines on my ruler. So that way I just have to trim 2 sides, the right and the top. Just like that. So do these for all your blocks. Alright, so to create the other rectangle for the quadrants, you're going to take 2 of your half square triangles. You're going to have color 2 pointing to the top right in one of them, and then you're going to have color 2 pointing to the bottom right, just like this. This side, on the left side, color 2 is pointing to the bottom right. On the right side, color 2 is pointing to the top right. Once you have it lined up like that, put them together, right sides together, and pin along that middle edge. And do this creating 3 additional units. Now take these to the sewing machine, sewing them at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance along the pinned edges. Then take them to your pressing mat and press the seams open. Alright, so now you have all of your rectangles for your quadrants. So take one of your parallelogram rectangles. Make sure that the color 3 triangle is pointing towards the top left. Take one of your half square triangle rectangles, making sure that the color 2 is pointing to the top right, and this is how it's going to lay out. So fold them right sides together and pin. Do the same with the remaining rectangles, always making sure color 3 is pointing to the top left. On top of this, color 2 triangle is pointing to the top right, and then pin in place. Go to your sewing machine and sew along these edges using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once again, press them open and make sure you press the seams open completely. So here are your 4 quadrants ready to be put together to finish the block. I wanted to mention that these seams do get very bulky as you're working with them, and you can see it doesn't lie completely flat. That's okay. Do your best when you're piecing them together to keep the seams open. It's going to help you in the long run, and it's going to make sure that the size of the block stays correct. By keeping the seams open, that allows the blocks to stay the same size. If you folded the seams to one side or the other and you have so many stacked up on top of each other, it's going to affect the overall size of the block. Just do your best, but understand that it is bulky. So first, make sure you lay it out and you like the way that it looks. If you need to make any changes, go back and do that now. If you're ready to complete the block, take 2 quadrants, put them right sides together and pin in place. Now take these to the sewing machine, and once again, a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance along each pinned edge, and then press the seams open. All right, now you have 2 halves of your block. Just fold them together. When pinning this time, I like to make sure I match up the middle seams first, and then I pin out. This just keeps your points pretty good. Sew along your pinned edge at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, pressing the seam open. So there's your completed block. What I like to do is I like to make sure it's cut down to size. So I line up the 4 1/4 inch mark on my ruler with the middle seam of my block. And then I just trim off any excess on the side. And here is your completed block. If you're making the side panel for the tote bag with Lorrie Nunemaker, you're going to need 2 of these blocks. First, take your blocks and put them right sides together and sew along the middle. This is easier. Just line up your seams for each square. Now take this to your sewing machine and sew at a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then press the seam open. So now you should have your 2 blocks sewn together. All we have to do to make sure this is the right width is add a 8.5 inch by 1.5 inch strip to each side. Now I like these strips to match my color too, to give it kind of a flowing look, but you can have them be whatever you want. All we have to do is line them up on the outsides and pin in place. And then take this to your sewing machine with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, press it open, and you are done with the middle section of the side panel for your tote bag. And that's how you make the quilt blocks for the middle portion of your tote bag. I mean, these are adorable, and I love that you can make it like a Christmassy version, or you can make it a fall version using some sort of like fun oranges and yellows and cream colors, or just like a really fun print. I love this quilt block, guys, and I love it in the bag. So let me just show you the bag one more time. So cute. You can see I use this really pretty glittery gold vinyl on the top and bottom, and then I used it also for the straps. And then this takes 2 quilt blocks, and you can see on the side we added those little strips, and that just makes it so that the quilt blocks really shine, and we have this beautiful color on the side that goes with it. I mean, I don't know. I love this bag. I love these quilt blocks. I hope you love these quilt blocks. I hope you love this bag. Again, Lorrie, thank you so much for collaborating with me. This was so much fun. I can't wait to see what everybody makes with these blocks and with these bag patterns. If you like this video, please give it a like. I hope you have a great rest of the week. Get out there and make something. Bye!